like to welcome you all here and start by acknowledging that tonight we're here together on Gadigal land, and I'd like to thank elders past and present for allowing that. The festival theme for 2019 is Accessing Design, and tonight it is my great pleasure to welcome Hobart-based furniture and lighting designer Duncan Meerding. Welcome, Duncan. And you can see some examples of Duncan's really beautiful work behind him and next to him. Duncan is a furniture and lighting designer based in Hobart, Tasmania, and he works with a range of materials. His designs draw heavily from the vast natural beauty of Tasmania's wilderness, with a focus on form and texture. Joining Duncan tonight is Kimberley Crofts, principal of Meld Studios and one of our brilliant festival advisors, and I thank her for that work. Since 2011, Kimberley has helped Meld clients to identify the opportunities that will have the greatest impact for them and their customers. She has recently led projects spanning the arts, transport, financial services, and placemaking. It is such an honour to have these two highly skilled creative practitioners and brilliant thinkers join us here tonight, and to give us insight into Duncan's design practice, working at the intersection of access and design. I'd like to also thank our partner on tonight's event, Accessible Arts, which is a very important New South Wales organisation, and we look forward to the discussion as it unfolds. Please join me in welcoming both of them.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Is this working for everybody? You can hear okay? To start with, before we start chatting, we'd like to play just a short video which shows a bit of Duncan's work and his practice.
When looking at the sort of stories behind my designs, and it is showcasing that you can create something that looks quite interesting or quite nice from what is otherwise considered waste. Something that's potentially negative or potentially being thrown out or burnt can be turned into something that, you know, is valued for years. A lot of my lights have light coming from the side or, you know, through and around an object. I suppose this is partially due to the fact that I'm legally blind with about 5% vision concentrated around the peripheral fields. If you sort of compare a lot of my lights with the dappling effect of trees in the wilderness, are quite similar in that effect. It's about, you know, dispersing light through and around a form, you know, as opposed to just directly lighting something up. When you're walking in nature, that sort of dappling effect really is quite interesting, but also relaxing, in my opinion. It affects people, I think, on a subconscious level. Hopefully these lights do as well. Disability or vision impairment or blindness, whatever you want to call it, isn't necessarily always a negative thing. Disability can often also enhance people's lives. A lot of the lights are sort of similar to concepts to my visual fields. In some respects, it sounds like my lights kind of fitted in with the brief by the Mach 1 Hotel, the light coming out from the darkness.
The Mach 1 Hotel. So that was a commission. I forgot to ask you about that.
Oh, I suppose I could talk about it now, I suppose. So that was a commission when it first came up. I thought it was actually a bit of I thought someone was pulling my leg. But it was for 101 lights and 20 tables for the Mach 1 Storytelling Hotel. And it was sort of a project that sort of came to its completion in sort of 2017. and they commissioned a lot of the log lighting products, like the crack log lights, and they approached me and my design firm to sort of, they liked the brief was, we like the cracked log lights, but we need them to come with some different functions. So there's like a reading light with a mouse hole in it. Right. I imagine a caricature of a mouse hole, like Tom and Jerry style sort of thing. And then, it's still got the cracks in it, and then there's an uplight, which kind of, to simplify what it looks like, it sort of looks a bit almost like a star picket, but a bit more refined than that, with a cracked log pointing upwards. And then there's the log banker's lamp, which is imagine one of the banker's lamps from a Superman movie, which is with the green shade. So half a log pointing downwards, with a rusted steel stem. So the rusted steel stem kind of brought it back to that storytelling idea.
Right. So all of those were a series then that started because of that commission.
Yeah. They had 25 of my lights. 25 rooms with my lights in them. Yep.
So we thought we'd start off by going through sort of the path that brought Duncan to becoming a designer, and then go through some of his work. And generally, we're just going to have a chat, and it just happens that you're all there listening in. So if that's okay with you, we'll just keep going. So Duncan, I was interested to know your path to becoming a designer, and then why this type of design, why furniture and lighting and not any other type of design?
I suppose I'll go backwards and answer the last question first. And I suppose for me, I just keep on getting drawn to the physical world of design. It doesn't necessarily mean I can't think about organisational design or the way something goes and look at things, but it goes back to the way of thinking. I probably shouldn't have started backwards, I probably should have started forwards, but anyway, it's always good to do that with jokes as well. I tell the punchline and then don't tell the joke. But I started sort of a design journey, for want of a better term, in end of 2006, beginning of 2007. My vision had degenerated in 2005. April 2005, I noticed my vision degenerating in my left eye, and playing with perspective. And by the end of 2005, I'd noticed my vision had degenerated to its full extent in both eyes, leaving me with about between 1% and 5% vision left, with vision concentrated around the periphery. So if you put your fists in front of your face, right in the sort of central eye sockets, and then I see on the outside of that. And I went back up to university and did sort of humanities-based subjects, wanted to go into social work. And then I ended up finding out about a scheme through Vision Australia teaching the blind and vision impaired how to use tools safely. You may notice I have 10 fingers, and touch wood, I want to keep it that way. So I sort of went and did that, and then did that with the premise of going and doing some wood skills as an elective at university, and then that sort of turned into furniture design, and I ended up majoring in furniture design and humanities history, and it was sort of a logical transition. I went from that making thing into the designing thing, and I think designing and making are quite interrelated, because there is a lot of problem solving and working out how something actually goes together. Whether you're designing something that's already making something that's already been designed, or designing something from the start, there are definitely skills which cross over between the two. And yeah, I then got a scholarship to do to Designed Objects Tasmania for a year, where I got to sort of experiment and do some more things, and developed a sort of a range of ideas there. And so I sort of worked on a range of lights, some of which a lot of them basically work with the dispersion of light through and around an object. Sort of relates back to that visual field I was talking about earlier, with light sort of bursting from the side. Or,
kind of like what's happening right now with that sun.
Yeah, that sun's kind of, hopefully some lighting designer will, Mother Nature might deal with it. So the idea of my lights are often about, creating a relaxing mood. Also, other bits of furniture and stuff that I do, it concentrates on overall form rather than intense detailing. So it sort of goes back to that positive interaction that my visual fields have with my designs.
And model making as a craft, as a designer, we use it quite a lot in our practice. Making models makes something explicit, other people can understand it. Can you talk about model making maybe in general in design? Have you seen it get used more or less? Is it a skill that you think other people should have?
Yeah, so I suppose a lot of people hear the word design and vision impaired, or the words design and the vision impaired, or the design and blindness, and they think, oh, how do you design? Because design's all about drawing and computer-aided drawing and things, and I think that's the thing that I think a lot of people in the design sector will already be able to know this, that design isn't necessarily just drawing. It's that's a tool, or one of the many tools that designers use. It's about a way of thinking. It's lateral thinking, and model making, I think, is a really interesting way to sort of deal with that, because for me, I need to be able to communicate my ideas somehow before I go into production. And if it's whether it's to get somebody to help me figure out a way of getting it produced by a third party, or even if it's just figuring out a way of getting something that I can actually interact with myself and understand what I'm sort of developing. I think a lot of designers that don't do model making come unstuck, because if you can draw something up in computer-aided programs, and it looks good, but you've got to see what the material actually does in real life. And there's, it's especially when we're talking about design in the sense of the word of 3D design, whether it's design of a space or design of an object or what have you. But without that sort of experimentation with the model making, you don't sort of get that sort of tactile feedback. And one example of model making where I designed it without really drawing it was the propeller pendant light. That came about because I was actually trying to obtain another form, but the timber pushed the twist into the propeller in a different way. And I sort of got a piece of plywood, with the same shape cut in on it, but with the grain orientated in different ways, and that sort of created this sort of twisted form. And you'll probably see it go through on the feed, but it's basically a lot of bits of plywood in sort of a teardrop shape, and they've got the grain going across a 45 degree, and it's that 45 degree has put the twist into it. And for me, I don't think I would have come with that design if I was drawing it.
Yeah, and so that really came from a mistake then. Yeah. Almost.
Yeah, well, there's a saying in woodwork that there's no mistakes, it's just design alterations.
Yeah.
But and I suppose it's the same with the designers. A lot of people say, that's the thing, is design is about problem solving, and so therefore if you make a mistake, that's part of the process.
Yeah. So materiality is very important to you. Can you talk a little bit about the materials that you use, and why you choose wood, or why you use this particular wood?
So a lot of the log products you'll see, they utilise the salvaged logs. A lot of them, it basically, again, it's going back to the materiality in terms of the log products. The original design came about because I had a log of wood that couldn't be used for much else. It had cracks running through it. It had been taken from an arborist, and I wanted to turn something with it, for a base of a light, but the cracks in it weren't going to allow for that. So I sort of went, I didn't really think that heavily about it. It was kind of an aha moment, for want of a better term, a bit of a whimsical thing of what happens if I put a light in it and see light coming out of the cracks. And that sort of idea of getting waste and turning it into something beautiful was, I think, quite important to me, but also creating designs, not necessarily because it's in trend, but because it's something that comes from within, or comes from a process of sort of problem solving or what have you. And I think that the strongest designs that are around are ones that aren't necessarily based upon trends, but are based upon standing the test of time, both sort of metaphorically and physically. So, true sustainability is not designing around trends, in my opinion. And in terms of other design timbers and stuff I tend to use a fair few things like Tasmanian eucalyptus, because it's a faster growing timber, blackwood and stuff, and it's faster growing timber, but I also think it's a really nice looking one. Yeah.
And you were talking earlier when we were having a conversation about the influence that the design thinker Kays Dorst had on you and thinking about trends, or rather why you don't see them, for want of a better term. Have there been other people who have influenced you and the way that you think about design greatly? Well,
Kays is an interesting one to discuss because, and you know, he's also amongst some other designers and friends of mine, like one of my long-term friends, Zach, and other designers down in Hobart, along with Kays, sort of went, why aren't you mentioning your vision? It's influencing your designs. Like it's fairly obvious. Like it's not a bad thing. But because I came from, you know, society where you mention the word disability, and you know, by virtue of the word, it is a person with a disability is, you know, talking about there's something where that person, there's something wrong with them, you know, you're dissing an ability. And, you know, we can go more about social and health model later, maybe about, and sort of explaining a bit about what disability and how society how society can disable people. But the stuff that Kays kind of said to me was that, yeah, the trends, not being able to see the trends necessarily is actually a positive thing. And also just being able to have that sort of design sort of come from within is also another positive thing, and you know, that light coming from different directions.
So the fact that the light comes so strongly through the peripheral vision, that's what really influenced, say, the log lamp in particular.
Sorry.
So, and then other work that you've done as well, or?
Yeah, well, the propellers, it's a bit hard to tell at the moment, but you know, when there's no spots or something from above, it actually throws quite amazing light patterns on the ceilings or what have you. And then the spirals light's the same sort of thing, and a lot of it is about trying to shroud the harsh light that comes down, because if you walk into a lot of commercial spaces these days, some of the lighting makes you want to be a bit sick. But you know, just because of that exposed bulb straight in your face, maybe I'm a bit more sensitive to it because of my vision, but I think everyone's probably had that experience where they walk in and go, ugh, and it sort of turns them off. But it's not really something that necessarily gets thought about at the beginning of the design process.
You mentioned a little bit before about the social model, and it's probably a good enough time as any. Would you be able to define for us the social model and versus the other sorts of models of disability?
Yeah. So in terms of disability, there's sort of two major models. There's the health model, which looks at people in isolation and say there's something wrong with that person. So you know, with me, we'll only focus on one thing that's wrong with me. But with me, there's, you know, I can't see very well, and so therefore it's looking at, you know, that's my disability. But if you look at it in the context of how does society disable me, that's the social model. So the fact that, for example, there's inaccessible websites, or that government departments send me hard copy letters. The fact that those things happen is the disabling factor, and that there is not a holistic approach to trying to figure out a way of limiting the health disability thing. Because at the end of the day, you can't just say, oh well, we can totally get rid of the health effect of a disability, but you can limit the effect of it through looking at things in the prism of the social model. I think that's one of the major issues that needs to sort of come out in terms of the NDIS, because it looks at the individual, and we need to really look at society, because it's not just the individual, it's about society, and it sort of comes back to the universal design mentality that as well. It's like, yeah, I'm going to sort of keep on going about all that, sorry, but you know, most people here probably walked across a curb, you know, one of those sort of bits you can sort of, if you had a push bike, you could push it down, if you had a pram, you could push it along. You know, it's a nice little curb. You don't jar your foot as much when you're crossing the road and you're going across the curb. That was designed by a person with a disability during the disability rights movement, and that was designed with a sledgehammer. That is effectively designed because you are changing things for the bettering of society, but it's doing it as a universal design mentality. it's not, I'm going to put something in that makes only people with wheelchairs be able to get around. It's putting something in that actually makes things easier for everyone. And the same with a touchscreen. Pretty much probably, I'd say 99, 100% of people in this room have a touchscreen phone. The touchscreen phone was actually developed by a person with a disability. And those are two rather large things that change our lives. And they're both universal design mentalities that help people with disabilities. So it's not a major thing to think, okay, well, why don't we try and do that with everything? Like, why don't we look at society in a holistic way and have a universal design mentality at the beginning, not as an audit tacked on at the end?
And that's what happens, right? It's always about the timing. So the disability audit happens at the end of the process when a building's already been designed, or anything about a service, it's always at the end. Or we bring in designers at the end to make it look beautiful, rather than thinking that they can be at the start helping to solve the problem early, so that you're designing the right thing and then designing the thing right. So how could it work if it was much better integrated? Like, are there other examples that you've seen where design, universal design, has been done really, really well?
There are heaps, but I can't think of them right now. Sorry. The touchscreen we were talking about before, but integrating talking software into computers and phones, that's only a new thing. Before, it used to be a niche market where the assistive technology people would charge you $2,000 for the ability to access information.
Which is another disability then, because you're having to pay more than other people do.
And it's a societal thing. It's like, well, the information is there in a textual format, but you can't access it because you don't have the software. But the talking software being built into iPhones and Android phones now is actually a universal design thing. That didn't used to be the case. You'd have to go and buy a bit of software every time you had a phone to try and have it talk. And the information access is a really big one.
Yeah.
But with normal design practice, it's not thought about. It's not being taught in schools. It's not being taught in practice either. So what can we do as designers, do you think, to make sure that we're a little bit more integrated and think a little bit more universally about how we can design?
I think society's structured in a risk-averse manner, and it's all about risk mitigation, and it's all about how can I not get sued. That's effectively what happened after that. Sort of, I can't remember when it was, the landmark court case, when there was the person got hurt on the playground in the US, and that sort of flowed on here. Rather than looking at it from purely a cost-benefit analysis, to look at it about a benefit for human life and a benefit for social justice, because it was an interesting conversation I had with an arts worker just today, actually, about, I was telling them about this talk that I was doing about art and disability and my vision and disability, but also in the context of the festival, accessing design. And the person made a bit of a off-the-cuff comment, and it's from an actual institute that is pretty switched on when it comes to disability and stuff. And I was talking about the festival being about accessing design, not just in terms of disability, but across class, gender, ethnicity, all these different things. And then I said, oh, that's good for you, isn't it? And it is good for me, but it's also good for everyone else, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there with disabilities that use design thinking in the way that they approach everything. So, for example, we're talking about problem solving before of designers. People with disabilities have to solve a problem every single day. The minute they step out into the side, a vision impaired person steps out into the sighted world, they have to work out problem-solving way of getting from point A to point B. That's just a very rudimentary way of doing it, but it's about utilising that problem-solving part of the brain. And that's a major untapped potential, because certain parts of society is not structured in a way that is creating an accessible environment. Like, education systems still need a bit of a restructure for the vision impaired to use it. There was an education department a few years ago, who will remain unnamed, that wouldn't allow students with vision impairments to use scissors.
Yet you can use power tools.
Yeah,
Amazing.
like, well, the thing is like you're going to have to learn at some stage how to use the scissors, and you know, like it's better to probably learn in a controlled environment where somebody can give you some tips. And it's the same with my, you know, my vision is like when I went through the university system and through the design sort of scholarship I was telling you about, I think I wasn't necessarily seen as people didn't see me as disabled, or they saw me as disabled, but they didn't see me it being as a major problem. They saw it more as a challenge, like a design challenge, a way of going, okay, this guy can't see very well. How can we limit the disabling factors? So that social model I was talking about.
Yeah.
But that wasn't set up through an institutional design. That was set up because those designers had open minds. And that's what I'm trying to say is that we need to probably look at, okay, how can we design society so that it is actually more inclusive and people can get access to that information, you know, through the museums, through the education departments, all these different things like that.
And that the broader problem-solving abilities, it seems to have much more of an opportunity more widely than just designing for disability. And I think you've mentioned before that because you have a vision impairment, that people might want you to only ever design for disability, but there's much more opportunity, much wider than that. You talked about a couple of people giving you those opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about the mentorship that you had that came about with the propeller light?
Yeah, so the propeller light came about because I went over to New Zealand and did a mentorship with David Trubridge. There's a lighting designer, internationally renowned lighting designer in New Zealand. It's with David Trubridge, but it's with David Trubridge, the institute, because there was 20 people that work there. And he also gave me lots of time and energy, and his team continued to do so. But it was actually interesting because I didn't sort of go through the full story with you before, because the process was quite interesting because it goes back to the disclosing disability, because I was timid and unsure, and I didn't mention it. And it was also maybe a little bit strategic. I didn't mention my vision impairment when I got the original agreement. I got them to agree. I got them to put it in writing, and then I also got a prize from the state government called the Minister's Biennial Youth Arts Prize. They like to put a big name on things. And then from that, I was able to go over. That prize is meant to be for a mentorship with an Australian designer or artist, and I figured New Zealand's close enough. But doing this process of getting their agreement, and then afterwards, oh, by the way, I'm legally blind. I've got less than 5% vision, and they're like, and sort of like there's this sort of awkward interchange over email with Josh, who's the general manager there, and said, look, there's lots of little things here that you might find difficult. There's lots of small components, all these different things. How do you want to go about that? I'm not sure about it. If it's the best place to have you come. It wasn't a go away. It was said like that. And I said, look, I've run my own practice for a couple of years. Let's play it by ear. I'll come over. If there's something you feel uncomfortable about me doing, I'll just lay back. But if just give me tasks and we'll just progressively go through things. It's all about familiarity with me for a lot of things. And I was putting together 2.5 metre high lighting structures in their facility by the when they just sort of moved into a new facility, and then by the end of it I was prototyping my own light through their facility as well. And they continue to play a mentoring role, but because I went through that sort of cheekiness, that kind of meant that it was a changing experience for them as well. And I think that's the thing is a lot of people come in with art and disability or design and disability, and they have misconceptions about what people can and can't do with disability. And yes, I do have hurdles, but yes, I also probably have those hurdles can also create ways of me to think in lateral ways.
So that happened, you did the propeller lights. You've also won another couple of awards.
Yeah. So when we were talking before about people with disabilities getting sort of pigeonholed, it sort of goes back to a lot of the opportunities that I've had have been in mainstream arts and mainstream design because of the sort of inclusive policies that was happening through the National Arts and Disability Strategy, which is currently under review, which is really important, I think, to have that independent arts and disability funding, because they don't, the NDIS by itself is not the be all and end all of things. museums need to be able to make themselves accessible, and they can't do that through the scope of the NDIS, from my understanding. But they could probably do it through the National Arts and Disability Strategy if funding allows, But the question you were saying in terms of being sort of pigeonholed and stuff and sort of being pushed in certain directions, I was really lucky because I was allowed into mainstream arts organisations, and there's the Dark Award I recently won was in 2018 in London, and over 6,000, I think it was over 6,000 lighting designers, architects and interior designers voted for it. I put it in hoping to get just a bit of exposure to industry, but it actually won Best Floor Light of 2018.
Wow.
It didn't win Best Blind Guy's Floor Light of 2018. It didn't win, oh look, pat the guy on the head, this is good for you, light of 2018. What it won was Best Floor Light of 2018. And, the problem is you sort of draw, especially in Australia, you kind of have to be careful not to, get too cocky. You don't want to get too, you've got to try and push yourself forwards and sort of say things and push yourself forwards with these things, but not come across as can't think of the right word, as obnoxious. But you've kind of also, when it comes to the disability side of things, if people are already making assumptions about you, you kind of have to as well. You kind of have to say, well, look, I've just done this in the sighted world. Imagine what could be possible if all people with vision impairments got access to learning skills in architecture and design, but not just learning it from the sighted medium, learning how to actually do this sort of design stuff, overall with drawing in three-dimensional ways. There are different ways to draw two-dimensional sort of drawing with three-dimensional tools, for example.
Yeah, and just being able to have that award and have it, not for the blind guy award, but for the large award, and is pretty incredible. You were talking earlier also about funding, but also one of the bits of disadvantage that I was really surprised about was how little designers who have disabilities are paid generally, and artists compared to others. What was it again?
Artists with disability get paid 43% of what able-bodied artists and designers get paid, and that's reflective of also other statistics. It's about 50-something% of people with disability. I think that's roughly what the unemployment rate is, I think, for people with disabilities. It's about 60 or 70% for people who are legally blind. And it's not just people that are unemployed, it's the people who are unemployed who are looking for work. So there'll be potentially the figure might be higher because there's this huge cross-section. And so when we're talking about universal design, we're talking about it in the concept of that's not acceptable, because there's not just because let's feel sorry for those people, but let's think about society as a whole. That's a huge amount of untapped potential and brain power that's not being accessed.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And 42% is just shockingly low. And I wonder if, you've won this award now, it's sort of like you can get paid, you can, make it with the, the big kids kind of thing. So it shouldn't be that you're getting paid less than, the Philip Starks or the whatever of the world. Like, why is it? It's crazy. Yeah. So, yeah. What's next then?
Well, I suppose for me, there's some stuff going on. Going back to what we were talking about in terms of how are we going for time? Is it?
We've got about 15 minutes before.
Cool. Before we take questions, yeah. So going back to that sort of thing I was talking about in terms of access to information and access to design. In April, I'm going over to Europe to exhibit at Euroluce, which is the largest lighting design exposition in the world, decorative lighting exposition in the world. It's like 300 and something thousand people go through the doors. Funnily enough, I've sort of been pulled in a conglomerate, for want of a better term, with David Trubridge and some other companies. And
that's the guy from New Zealand?
That's the guy from New Zealand, and they sort of took me under their wing, so to speak, and sort of mentored me, and they've continued to mentor me since 2011. And so there's that, and hopefully some things will come from that. But also, I've got a consult happening with the University College in London, where they're trying to set up a course to teach the blind and low vision people skills to be able to start become architects or designers. And so I'm going in there to be a bit of a consultant, because I think there was a bit of trepidation about having people with low vision in their workshop. And so a legally blind photographer, who I later found out through this whole process is also a legally blind architect. She then got them to get in contact with me, and I'm being brought over after the trade show to sort of do a bit of a audit in terms of accessibility, but also going through and sort of talking about different ways of designing when you can't necessarily see what you're designing.
Will that have any input into the broader curriculum of their architecture degree, do you think? Or do you hope?
In terms of for the sighted?
Yeah.
I hope so. I actually hope that it's not a compartmentalised thing in the long run. To be honest, I think there could be a really interesting process where people with sight could learn from the people with vision, without the vision, and vice versa. I went through a degree where I'm still mates with a fair portion of the people I went through that course with, and a lot of them I learned a lot from, and vice versa, they learned a fair bit from me. But not just me, not like of the passive, drawing on the board or anything. It's just the process of, here's a problem, let's work it out together. And I think that would be an amazing sort of process to get some designers to sort of just tap the brains, but also get the people doing those courses now to think, okay, how do I design a building so that a person who is blind can navigate it more easily, or how can I get it so that it's more accessible for someone to navigate in a wheelchair or something.
And thinking about that first, rather than, now we have to review our design.
Yeah, because we're talking about proactive and reactive design. So obviously the curb was a reactive design.
With the sledgehammer.
Yeah, with the sledgehammer. And there's other bits of reactive design that happen because of this little thing called the Disability Discrimination Act, which sometimes forces government bodies and companies to do things retrospectively. Whereas we're talking about that risk management, it saves a lot of time for everyone if it just gets thought about at the beginning. But also, throughout the process, and not necessarily a separate thing where it's an access audit, but it's called universal design.
And then it's all integrated.
Yeah.
I mean, you can often tell those designs, can't you? You walk up to a building and you go, oh yeah, that was an afterthought.
Yeah. So, and obviously there are certain limitations you have to work within, like heritage listings and things like that. And there's a lot of understanding that has to be taken into account across the board with all the different things. But the process of actually trying to think about these things at the very beginning is really important, I think. Yeah.
With your workshop, is that a heritage building? Have you done anything to it to make it easier for you to work in it?
I think anyone who's stepped into my workshop would probably be quite entertained by the inaccessibility of it.
There is a picture, I think there's some pictures, is there, in the deck of it?
Yeah, there is a picture in there somewhere. I think
this is one which has a whole bunch of boxes, the little boxes, the little tea boxes.
Yeah.
And a lathe by the look, and a useful offcuts box.
Oh yeah, probably with my really neat handwriting. So the floor is actually removable. It's a fairly rudimentary shed. It was constructed to build boats. It's in the back of sort of North Hobart behind a bunch of cafes and stuff. And the floor is actually laid directly on the dirt, I think. I don't think there was any slab ever poured, and I don't even know if there's actually footings.
No insulation then?
No. So I bought a heated jacket pretty quickly after moving in there. But the floor is created in such a way you can lift up whole panels to shove something directly into the ground to hold up the ship as it's being built. Right. So they used to build a bunch of ships through that shed. The old occupants, and I rent it from a family that actually owned that property since sort of the 1800s. They're involved in the anti-transportation movement, and there was a tree planted in 1853 to commemorate the end of transportation to Tasmania, so the end of convicts coming to Tasmania. And what happened was it died about 6 years later, not 6 years later from then, but 6 years ago. And my landlord commissioned me to make a piece of work from it. It was a bit nerve-wracking to make something from a piece of wood that pretty much couldn't really be replaced.
What did you make?
It was actually one of the stump lights. So it was a way of maintaining that piece of wood and so that they could see it, because this it was the son of the mother-son combo that I rent from, and he wanted to keep it because it really reminded him of his grandmother and sort of growing up on that property.
And that history.
Yeah.
So that's in their house now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. And I encourage everybody when we break to come up and touch the lamps if you haven't already. They're really quite an amazing texture, and also smell them, because you can still smell the wood, and it's quite evocative. They're quite amazing.
But in terms of the other stuff you're talking about in terms of worktop and adjusting it, I've got a range of different things, and probably spend a fair bit of time talking about different ways that I make things, and any maker in the room probably would understand what a jig is. A jig is something you utilise to do repetitive or fine work, and for me, I have a huge amount of reliance on a jig, because a jig means you don't have to draw any lines. It's all about, a basic one would be a circle cutting jig. Just imagine a compass, which you would have used in high school or something to draw a circle. It's basically the same principle, but you've got a pivot point, and then you've got a blade, take like a bandsaw blade, and you spin the wood around to get a circle. That's a jig. So just because I can't necessarily see that it's been cut where, doesn't necessarily mean I can't cut a circle. It's like but that's actually a really common thing for a maker to be able to use something like that. But I also use things like feeler blocks, talking tape measures, talking calipers, and all that sort of stuff is on sort of the forefront of changing a bit. There's a range of Bluetooth calipers and Bluetooth angle finders that are now coming through, and they can then go to your phone directly, and they're looking at the design at the beginning with some of them so that it has the accessibility built in into the application, and so it's not being built for the blind, but it's being built with the blind in mind. And I think that's the key, really important thing, because it means that it's not heaps of money. So one of these devices is like $80, but another thing I bought by the talking tape measure is about $400. And for anyone that probably has a tape measure, $400 is a bit of a joke for a tape measure. But that's the only thing there's like two tape measures on the market. One's like $300, one's $400, and the $300 one just sort of falls apart when you look at it. There's a few bad jokes you could make there. Anyway, and then there are other tactile blocks and things like 10mm spacers, feeler gauges, for want of a better term. But other things it's not just about the physical things, it's about techniques that I've sort of developed, including, it's a fairly basic thing, like even if you've isolated a machine and turned it off, you run a piece of wood up to the blade and check that the blade's not spinning, because you can get another bit of wood you can't get in your hand. Yeah,
this is true. So in the video that was shown at the start, is that the talking tape measure that you're using then?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's pretty good overall, and it sort of sounds like I'm in the London Underground, but it sort of goes back to that thing. Is like that's been a retrofit. That design isn't an integrated design. It's not a universal design. Not like the calipers or the angle finder. Like the calipers is actually incidental, because you can just use it as a keyboard that sends it to your phone, and it then sends information, it reads it to you. You just press a data output button on the caliper, and it sends it to your phone, and it reads it in the calculator application. But so a sighted person, it's perfect for the sighted world, because
you measure, it goes to the calculator, add another thing.
Yeah, or you just hit clear and then do it again to get the information, because it's made so that people can do data entry of lots of measurements. So it's a classic case of design for everyone, universal design. And it was actually incidental that it went with the iPhones, or the Androids that are accessible. It's the same with another company that's developed something called Wixie, and they actually got a blind person to do the beta testing on it, to make sure that it was working with all the softwares. But it's a basic angle finder, which is really handy for the sighted people, so they don't have to twist their head when the blade is going like that, because it's kind of handy not to have to twist your neck around as a sighted person as well.
Yeah. So it has a lot more applications than just for people with vision impairment.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So a lot earlier you were talking about museums not being able to necessarily get funding to do a lot of access stuff, and some of the problems inherent in the NDIS being all about the individual.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something future. Let's talk about something a lot more positive. If a museum such as this one that we're in, or any other museum, like, was going to design like really well for access, could you describe to us, sort of like, walk us through from the moment that you arrive, or even maybe a little bit before that, what would that experience be like for you as a person with a vision impairment? What would that museum experience be like for you, and it being really, really positive?
Yeah, I'll definitely be positive. But just to give people some context, I have been to some museums in Europe, and also I think there's some problems here in some of the places in some of the museums in Australia as well. But the experiences I had in London, for example, was I got handed an accessible device in inverted commas, but none of the alt text was embedded in the buttons of the thing, so there was no accessible audit done of the actual thing by a vision impaired person. It was like, we've done it, and that's it. But then there was another time I went to the London Design Museum, and I asked for if they had any accessible information for the vision impaired, and they were just sort of was like, and you'd kind of think in a design museum of all things, they would probably have thought about that, but no, they didn't. So in terms of the context of say I was wanting to go to a museum in Australia, the way that would be really good for me, starting from the beginning, is first of all, the information comes, like this event tonight, in an accessible format. The information advertising it, it's in a thing where the images all have alt text embedded in them, the buttons have alt text embedded in them, the information is accessible. You don't have a robot on the other end of the phone. It's always handy to actually be able to talk to people if you're wanting to try and find out information about events as a person with a disability, because a lot of robots aren't really programmed to ask them about specific quite specific human needs. And then catch a public transport which is nice and accessible and reliable to the museum. And
is anyone doing that particularly well in the city?
Well, I think a lot of people do hate on Sydney public transport, but I actually think they do a good job with some things, like some really good things, like the one of them that I really like is the the announcement on the train. You catch the train from the airplane to the city, and it announces it. And the same with the buses. When I first arrived here, bus drivers are really well trained here, and there's certain states that could maybe learn that as well, that they open the door, yell out the number, because they see the cane and they automatically stop. Because I've had drivers drive past me in other situations before because they thought I was just sitting at the stop doing something. So that having that accessible transport. So say I'm in Sydney, the public transport's really good. By in terms of that access, in terms of that accessibility stuff, but I can read the timetables in an accessible manner. The information is uploaded into Google Maps and all this stuff, and then I arrive at a museum entrance. The bus driver drops me off at the entrance and tells me that I'm there, and then I'm able to walk along, and then my cane hits a tactile footpath, and then the footpath, is really like, it leads me to the front entrance, and then to some people at the reception, and they then can hand me a mobile phone type of arrangement that has got voice stuff built into it. That voice stuff can then actually lead me around the museum without me having to rely on having a sighted person with me. It uses 4-point technology, which is this thing that's used to use in a GPS program called Blind Square, and they've actually utilised it recently in internal settings like shopping centres or conference centres. And that Blind Square thing can give you directions to precisely where to go somewhere, not just based upon the Google Maps thing, because I'm sure everyone's gone told they're somewhere and don't think they're actually there because they're like good 20-30 metres away from it because the GPS.
So this is really accurate.
This is really accurate. It pinpoints you down to the metre, and it said, so for example, Blind Square. If I say I've got my phone and it says, Kimberley is 3 o'clock at 2 metres or something, that would be part of the way this program would work. It would have a map of the exhibition where it'd take you to the first part of the exhibition, the feature exhibition, and it would go item number 1. It takes you through to that. Says item number 1 on exhibition of modern Australian design is 1 o'clock at 30 metres.
And of course it would be one of your works.
No, maybe later on in the piece. And then you feel, and then it tells you you can feel for the digit 1 at about 1 metre from the ground, and then at that digit 1 you can then take a photo or a QR scan or something, like a scan of a barcode, and it will start giving you audio description of that work. And then it gives you another audio description to the next work once that's finished. It says keep on moving, because this 4-point technology, it figures out where you are when you're holding the phone. So you've got to hold the phone upright, and it will say, your such and such, exhibition 2 is 20 metres at 11 o'clock. And then you walk to that next one and it gives you the same thing. And that exhibition of contemporary design doesn't just have myself, it's got other people with disabilities in there. It's also got people without disabilities in that exhibition. It's got disability and non-disability art exhibited in a combined way, where the disability is embraced as well as doesn't have to necessarily be mentioned sometimes as well. But people get to go through this exhibition and get to see able-bodied and non-able-bodied people's works.
Sounds like a great exhibition.
It sounds like a great exhibition, but that whole process of doing that, and obviously I'm talking about this from my own perspective, and you're able to do that whole tour without having to go up and ask somebody to press each button on your reader.
And this is all stuff that exists now and can be used.
This is all stuff that would be free from current technology, that if museums were to look at stuff at the beginning of the process, and again had the funding, that would help, because obviously disabilities is a marginalised sector, and so are the arts for that matter. Arts are one of the first things to lose funding when the governments decide to start slashing. But culture is a really important measure of the way society goes. And so having access to that culture and having something to be able to be explained and accessed is really important, because not having access to that culture means that you're missing out on being able to develop and see how the country or how the world is going, and how to develop. And I suppose one example could be the audio description, which we'll get Imogen to make, of some work that will be coming up any second on the screen.
Yeah. Would you like to come in? I wonder actually, so I'm not sure if anybody noticed Imogen here a little bit early on was doing an audio description of some of the work for some of the people with a vision impairment here. And to finish up the sort of formal part of the talk, and I think it ended on a really good point there in calling out the need for culture and access to culture. We'd like Imogen to do an audio description of a slide that's going to come up. And I'm not sure if should we get people to actually close their eyes if they don't have a vision impairment, just so that you can, but I just it's really quite an amazing skill that Imogen has. So go for it.
A slide showing on the 3 screens in the space. It's a photographic image of a person sitting in a grassy clearing with their back leaning against a tree trunk on the right. The trunk is of a tree fern, which has tall green fronds arching up out of the top of the image. Other tall tree ferns surround the space, and their arching fronds create a green canopy over the cleared area. In a row, a diagonal row from left of the image to centre right, are 3 tree stumps with deep cracks, deep vertical cracks running from top to bottom, through which bright yellow light is emanating, causing wide bands of light to spread across the forest floor. The woman leaning against the tree trunk has her head turned to the right and is looking towards another person who is further back in the shadows, leaning with one elbow up on the back tree stump, looking towards her. She wears long brown boots, jeans, and a long sleeve top, and her companion also wears long sleeves. They're in half light, and beyond them, outside the circle of tree fronds, are more tree ferns, and more ferns and rainforest vegetation. A bluish light is cast over the shadowy forest beyond them, and a trench runs around the outside of the mossy clearing, which has a glistening patch at the bottom in the front of the image, as if there's some water in the ground amongst the rocks and soil. To the left, a very tall trunk defines the image on the right, creating a dark vertical that contrasts with the vertical beams of light emanating from the 3 tree stump log lights.
Thank you, Imogen. So we're going to wrap up our sort of chat, unless there's something else that I've forgotten to ask you and you wanted to talk about.
No, but we're taking chat questions from people. But before we go to that, I suppose I'd like to thank the Powerhouse and you, Kimberley, as well, for keeping me on task. But also, having only met you in the last sort of few days and a bit before that over email, sort of realising there's really a lot of good work being done across the design sector already. And it's something that we can all sort of build together. So thanks for that, and also thanks to the Powerhouse for sort of setting up this whole concept of trying to make design more accessible. That it's not just meant to be something that should be consumed by elites. It's something that can be appreciated by everyone. Not just in terms of the disability spectrum, but across all those different things that we're talking about before. Ethnicity, gender, class, all those things.
Thank you. So, questions. There's a couple of microphones around. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask? There's one up the back and there's one over here as well.
Hello.
Maybe if you could stand up so we could see you. Thank you.
Cool. Hey. I just wanted to hear more about your design process, especially the model making process that you mentioned before. Do you start with like a sort of lower level model and then iterate to a high level, or do you start with a different material like clay or something and then form it out of wood, or do you start with wood itself?
I suppose it depends on the situation. Like that propeller light, I would have had difficulty, I think, to do that model maybe. I came up with that model kind of by mistake in some respects, so it's a hard one to sort of use as an example. But there are other ones where I've gotten a coat hanger, hot melt glue and cardboard, and that represented the form. And from that, I then sort of worked out another model. I did what I thought was going to be the one-to-one model, which was quite an interesting experience, making a one-to-one. It was like a 1-point-something metre high lamp, but it was done with paper, mild steel and chipboard. And then from doing that, realised that there was too much flex in the actual material that I was going to use, and then went back down to a higher width of, a higher diameter stainless steel when I did the final thing. And unless you've got a really amazing engineering knowledge, and even if you do have that amazing engineering knowledge, it's really good to, especially when it comes to furniture, sort of play around with the materials, and it's different for different applications. And so when it came to the steel, this is a university project, so I, especially at that point, didn't have that much of as much of an understanding of its properties, and doing a bit of playing around with the thinner diameter steel was really important. So that thinner diameter steel thing still looked a bit rudimentary. I pulled it apart and used bits of it for other things later, but I didn't. It wouldn't be a product. It still looked a bit primary school.
Did that go into the useful objects box afterwards?
Actually, I got parts of it and turned it into the leaf table.
Okay.
So utilising sort of model making in larger scales and just sort of putting them to the side. And I did, because it was my workspace at uni, I just kind of hid it to a corner and then utilised it when I needed it. So yeah.
There was another question at the front here.
Hi, Duncan. I was just wondering, you live in a beautiful part of the world and you're using natural products, and you were mentioning taking a holistic approach. I was just wondering if you've come from a Rudolf Steiner background, and also is your eye condition, you're talking about your peripheral eyesight, is that Stargardt's?
It's definitely not Stargardt's, because I don't know what that is. It's called Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. I won't spell that for you. It's or LHON is the acronym for it, and it affects. It's a hereditary condition that strikes a bit at random, and not all males that have the gene get affected by it, but it's transferred through the mitochondria, so that the self-generating RNA, I think that's the word for it. I'm not a biologist. Some biologists can pull me up on that later. It comes from the female's genetics, from the mitochondrial side of things. And so, for example, one of my uncles has got similar vision to me, and the other one has full sight. But it strikes at random and it hits mainly males. Some females get affected very rarely though, and the males lose their sight around the age of sort of 18 to 20. And Steiner still, no, I wasn't. I didn't go through one of them. I actually went through public high school, and I got some of my wood skills and stuff also from my dad, just sort of wanting to play around. We made billy carts and raced them around. Didn't put brakes on some of them, and he taught me how to wood turn and stuff. But then went through a public school where the wood skills was taught, and I think that's a really important thing to also look at as well. Is like, the maths and English is a really interesting thing to look at, but also looking at ways of teaching design and design thinking, whether it's through making or whether it's through other mechanisms. It's really important because not everyone gets the chance to go through university or even the want. But giving those design skills at a high school level is really important, and understanding that the importance of it is really important. And I think funding for that across the board, private, public, is really important. And yeah, just to sort of I think my public education was really good in terms of its holistic approach.
Go public education.
Yeah.
It's another question at the front.
Duncan, thank you for your talk. What is, a slightly strange question, what is the biggest advantage your eyesight has actually given you?
There's a few. I suppose God, sorry. Well, my vision has given me a unique selling point with my work. If we want to be totally brutal about it, but that's also, that shows that how society is limited at the moment as well. That I'm doing my work as a vision impaired designer, and the fact that that's an exception and that's a unique selling point showcases the limitations within society at the moment. It doesn't say that I'm amazing. It shows that there's limitations within society, but in the current context, that's definitely been a helping factor in terms of, put it extremely brutal way. It's a unique selling point. But it was also just given me a different way of thinking about things. I'm not. I did a bit of volunteer work with an organisation in India a few years ago, and it's run by a woman called and a partner, but she's called Sabria Tenberken, and she's totally blind. And her lovely saying that she loves to do is say, "I really have empathy for the sighted. You know, they're always getting distracted," and to some extent that's the case, and maybe that's a good reason to actually have inaccessibility with certain things like social media. But you know, by the same token, I use social media a lot in my business because I'm a sole trader, and I have to be able to do that myself. But you know, the minute they make a button inaccessible in Instagram or Facebook, which happens more regularly than you'd expect, I have to then go find someone and just hand it to them. So it's definitely given me some really good skills.
Your thing's just switched off somehow.
I wonder if that's a message. So anyway, I can just go down to the left hand if you want. The thing that I think definitely get a bit less distracted by things. I could have potentially been talking to a room full of mannequins I may not have known, but I'm really lucky that you're all engaged and interactive. I suppose the different way of seeing is definitely informed, thank you, the way I do things, the way I get artistically informed, but also my problem-solving abilities. So.
Let's see how we go with that one. Yeah. There's another question.
You talked earlier.
Sorry, one question. You got pipped at the post.
Just a fraction faster, sorry. Duncan, you mentioned early on that you started to use other people to make some of your designs. I'd be really interested to hear a little bit about how you communicate the specifications and the quality control that you have over your design output.
That's a really interesting question because there's been some rather major issues that have happened through me specifying measurements, and because I can't draw and I can't cross-check anywhere near as easily. Like I used to be able to do some, like the propeller form, for example, I drew that up in CAD, but it sort of feels like someone's pulling on your eyeball after a while with my vision. You know, if you imagine a matchbox and imagine a normal screen, I'm looking at the matchbox size of the screen blown up. So it's a huge amount of stuff that I'm looking at once. And you can do a lot of the programs with keyboard commands and things, but there's a certain point where you've just got to cut your losses and just get someone else to do certain tasks. And I think all design firms, all architects do that. You know, there's certain architects that are around that don't know how to use computer-aided drawing, you know, of the older generations in particular, and it's about the ideas. But for me, not being able to cross-check things it's thrown some interesting challenges, but it shows that you've also got I need to look at design thinking in terms of my approach. I need to think about risk management and contingency. So because of some of the mistakes that have happened, luckily, you know, when we're only talking hundreds of dollars rather than thousands or millions or something, you know, it is a mistake that is good to sort of happen now, but you know, just basic ones like keys on drawings. And then having keys in a PDF that then can be I can then access with my screen reader to cross-check, but also that then the person at the other end can then cross-check when they're plotting the camming course, for example, with a computer-controlled laser cutter or something, for example. And yeah, the quality control, yeah, so I tend to also before I pack things up, I'll also ask people to have a look and check things. But when it comes to making things, sometimes, for example, the propeller disc, that was cut originally with a 4-axis water jet cutter, and they were charging quite a bit per hour. And then rather than them telling me that they didn't want to do it, they just charged another 50%. And people do that. And so I just went, well, I'm going to just start talking to people, and worked out a way from talking to another like small scale sort of fabricator, like a person that does stuff on the side of his main job. And he said, you can cut it on the table saw. It was quite terrifying, but I was cutting aluminium in discs on the table saw to cut those slots. And so sometimes it's just a matter of just eliminating things that can potentially be stuffed up by third parties. But that system can then now also be, I could then take that system to a manufacturer with less high-tech technology and ask them to do it, and then not have to deal with the people that were just difficult.
There was a question at the front now. The microphone's coming.
How did your family and friends feel when you began this work? I know that technology has improved so much in the last few years. I mean, just a lot of stuff that you can do with your phone that you couldn't do probably 10 years ago or so. How did they feel about you getting your hands on a saw of some sort, or some of the technology? Did people sort of say, I'll go away so that you can do it without me looking? Because I know that a lot of my family and stuff would say, how are you going to get from point A to point B, and things like that when I was much younger, because I used to, in the end, I'd say, look, just don't worry, let me handle it.
So for context, we're talking to the person asking the question.
Yeah. It's me, I'm asking you about.
Yeah, no, I mean, just so everyone else knows about your vision. You've got a vision impairment as well, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of that, I think a lot of people with vision impairments have been told certain career paths, and I don't actually remember this interaction. I've kind of forgotten, but somebody told me recently they went through one of the low vision institutes within Tasmania and talked with someone there, and that person had said, Duncan, you should think of becoming a masseuse. And just think of all the other cliche things that were suggested. Like, basically, think of the cliche that was said to me. That's what you should do. So, but I don't actually remember saying this back, but I said, I'm going to do woodwork. And I actually don't remember that at all. I blocked it from my mind, but it's obviously remained with him and changed his perceptions of what people can and can't do. In terms of my family, I also like rock climb and things along those lines, but I wouldn't say I'd do it in a dangerous manner. I'd do it with people that I trust, who understand how much I can and can't see. And it's the same with the woodwork. I touch wood, haven't actually cut any fingers off. None of these are prosthetics. But I have had some rather major near misses. I've partially severed a tendon and I've fractured a bone in my hand. Funnily enough, fracturing my bone in my hand was from a sander. So anything can get you. But if you have that mentality with everything, you wouldn't leave the house. But even then, you could potentially suffocate yourself with the doona. But the thing is when my mum actually, when I started doing the woodwork and I started doing the rock climbing, she kind of said to me she'd given up worrying about me, but I think that's kind of a white lie. But my dad didn't actually believe that I was doing the woodwork at first, and he's come around a lot now. And it's actually been a process, because he actually comes in and he's one of the people that is sort of one of my aides in the workshop sometimes. He helps make the propellers, for example. So, and that then goes back to the communicating with somebody and having somebody there you can talk directly to, rather than dealing with drawings and emails and offshoring and all this other stuff, which I probably wouldn't want to offshore necessarily anyway for other moral reasons, but it's just an interesting thing to sort of think about. But there's definitely a degree of disbelief when I first started to do it. And there's also, I still encounter that from people in the public. Like, I was on a rock climbing trip a few years ago and somebody said, "Oh, it's good to see you out." And I almost said, well, anyway, I won't go through what I almost said to him. But then I got asked by somebody else who I later went rock climbing with and I've become quite good friends with. But he was just asking because he was curious, and English was a second language, and he was from probably a more European culture in terms of being a bit to the point. He said, do you live with other people like you? And I had a lot of fun with it and said, oh yeah, you should meet my housemates. Like, they're all a bit funny, and and then I just didn't really answer the question directly, and it progressively got more awkward. But the thing is luckily my friend stepped in and helped educate him. But I think a lot of the time, you can have a bit of fun with it, but you probably should also try and explain the situation and just sort of take people on face value and realise that, you know, I know that when my vision first degenerated, the first thing that went through my head was sitting in the corner of a room listening to a radio, because that's what effectively was happening to me in the first few months of my vision degeneration. And it was only because I was able to have access to the information through people like my uncle mentoring me, which was really crucial.
Any other questions? One up the back.
Hiya. I really like your work. It's very good. But I work with power tools too as well, like for the last 10, 15 years. And I'm amazed you have all your fingers, by the way. I really am. I don't quite understand how you can like make something, because you have a vision in your head, and you mentioned jigs, but you must have a lot of jigs, because like when you have something, or you mentioned aids as well, which you obviously have an idea and you put your idea to somebody else and you both construct it together. My question is kind of like, do you make the jigs, or is it your aid that makes the jigs? Because you can't have a jig for everything, because like even some of the slots in the lamp, the log lamp, and I really like it. It's a very clever idea, the way that there's not too much light coming out of it, and you can still see the naturalness or the beauty of it. But like getting in and around that, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of work to construct that. You know what I mean? You can't get a jig in there, and I can't understand. Is that so? You come up with the idea, and then it's a team effort from there on in, or how does it work?
It depends on the situation. So the stump lights, for example, there aren't many jigs. They're just done freehand, a lot of it, and it's, huh? No, they're slots. No, they're not done with jigs. In these ones? Yeah, no. No, they're freehand. But if you have a closer look later, you'll probably, if you're a woodworker, you'll potentially figure it out. But I won't disclose all my IP right now. But in terms of the bottom of it, it's been routed out with a jig that was cut by a laser cutter. Utilising a thing with a collet pattern that follows this pattern to put a D-shaped hole in it, and then a hole for these keyhole brackets, which are actually cut out by another laser cutter.
Is this your IP now, though? Just checking.
No, this is not IP.
Cool.
You guys can leave the room after this.
Yeah.
Anyway, in terms of some of the other jigs I do, like the propellers, for example. They're cut by someone else. They're cut by either an aid or by by another subcontractor.
It's a team process.
Yeah. Like I'm kind of that annoying. I'm that annoying guy that follows people around and points at things. But no. Like there's certain things I do. Like there's also certain processes that I wouldn't feel comfortable getting other people to do. Like the cutting of the propeller discs. It frightens the hell out of me. So it's putting something on an angle, on a compound angle on a disc, and then putting it through a high spinning aluminium blade, and then you got cutting lubricants flying around as well. And I just think it'd be best that if something in that situation went wrong, it would happen to me, not to other people. So there's certain tools I don't have other people use necessarily who come in as aids, but that jig, for example, was worked out with me and another person, and we made it together. There was a lot of flying around of figures, and it's actually quite interesting because one of the people I work with is very audible and very able to comprehend a lot of that information very quickly, and he's very good at explaining things in a audible way, in a visual way, if you know what I mean.
No, I do. I take it on board. I take the hat off. It's pretty good.
Sounds like a good collaboration anyway, as a normal design practice might happen.
Yeah, or an architecture firm, or if you try and do everything these days, you'd just be working 16-hour days, which I think a lot of people would end up doing pretty close to anyway these days. But
speaking of time, we should probably wrap it up. And we're going to be staying for a drink up the back, and welcome everybody to stay as well. And Duncan can be there to answer some of your questions if you didn't get to ask them. So thank you very much, Duncan, for coming up and being us tonight, and thank you to the Powerhouse for putting this on. We had a great time, and thank you for coming.